Okay, does anybody want to share either via chat or you can use your mic? Okay, so what is flipping? I really like this kind of illustration. It has the Bloom's levels, and it goes from the traditional classroom is on the left, so lecture. In class, your students are kind of doing the sort of passive things, remembering, understanding, analyzing. But then out of class, they're doing more of the actual creation and evaluating of the content. But with flipped, and that's kind of why we have flipped, it kind of flips the order there of the levels of learning. So in class, they're going to be doing more of the active things, and out of class, they'll be doing more of the passive. Okay, so there is a faculty member, I want to say North Carolina, is that right, university? I think. Dr. Barbara Honeycutt, or Barbie, sorry, she goes by Barbie. And she's kind of coined this flip, and she calls it focus on your learners by involving them in a process. And so, like I said, in the classroom is when you're doing the higher order thinking skills. So having students participate in things that they could not do if they were outside the classroom and you were not physically in the same place together. So for example, you might want to do small group discussions where you as the instructor are walking around the room and intervening when you hear your student saying something incorrect. So because you're there, if they're actively discussing and learning, you can kind of jump in and correct misunderstandings or maybe just guide them to help them figure out, what they're struggling with.
Okay, so a lot of times faculty say, well, I'm already doing this, and it is true. Flipping is not something new, although the term was kind of coined in the past 5 years. A lot of times people say, well, I give homework to read and I have them do problems, and then I have them come in class and do more problems. So although it's a new term, it's something that has been around for many, many years. So some of the research, some faculty want to know the research behind it. And so the research is really not from the past 5 years, it's even earlier from that. So there are kind of 5 main emphasis, which is pausing, chunking, interacting, cooperating, and solving. And I'll go ahead and go through each of these. So pausing, it's not, when you think of pausing, you might be saying, okay, I'm going to ask the audience a question, ask my students a question, and hopefully somebody will raise their hand. But if they don't, maybe instead of calling upon somebody, that'll just wait an extra 5 seconds. That's good practice too, but that's not what this means. So pausing for here, it's saying after maybe 10 or 15 minutes of instruction, having some breakout time, 2 to 3 minutes to just digest the information and maybe share notes with peers. A lot of times, maybe use clicker questions and to see if they gauge and know that material before you move on to the next harder concept. So some of the research comes from 1987, where doing the pausing method, where it was sharing notes at the time, really helps short-term memory and then in turn, long-term retention of that information. So in 2004, they used the same method to see if it was still up to date with today's students. And on a test where one class they did pausing, the other they didn't, and they just went straight through, there was 108 correct facts for the group that did pausing versus 80. And then the test scores, the correlation was that the one with pausing got higher, average of 80.4, where the other one got 72.4. And another one, but I didn't want to put too much information on the slide, was the lower test score was 80.9 for the non-pausing class, and then 89.4 for the class that did pausing. Another one, which is kind of a funky term, is called chunking. A lot of times faculty might say, okay, I've had this happen where it's like, I don't know how to break it down. I just lecture and I go the full hour. Although that's great and your subject matter is fantastic, sometimes students can't comprehend all that information. So breaking it down in smaller aspects. So I am allowed to tell you of the one faculty member, it was more like anatomy and physiology, and she would just rush through and go through all the muscles. But saying, hey, you could kind of say, how does it relate for the muscles in the leg and then the bone structures underneath? So if you kind of break it down, it's still relatable, but chunking that into smaller pieces and taking that brief break of pausing that we talked about earlier. So in 2002, they did a study about the typical attention span of students, and surprisingly, it was 15 minutes at the time. I think in the age of YouTube, since 2006, I would probably guess informally that it's a little shorter than that. But I know it's really hard to make 5-minute videos or 5-minute lectures and then a break. So I think ideally 15 minutes is good. And in the 1970s, they did some research about retention of information. So students knew and remembered 70% of the info from the first 10 minutes of the lecture. And in this case, it was an hour long, so they only knew 20% of the information from the last 10 minutes. So again, some older research, some newer research, but it is pretty interesting. Thinking of it from an online perspective of making that relatability that I talked about, let's say you have a PowerPoint and you have 50 slides. Although it's hard, you could kind of break it out into those maybe 4 sets of short logical statements. And then from there, it's what I talked about earlier, is saying, bridging that first section to the second. So you could add an introduction slide for the first one, just to introduce the topic. Maybe the second chunk, it'll be how it relates to the previous concept. And then at the end of each, you could add a summary and saying what's going to happen next. And so you might say, why would you do this, especially for videos? Some research, and the link is down below for you to review. It gives that short-paced learning. It has that relatability and how different aspects relate to one another, that pausability and repeatability that we had talked about earlier. And students learn at a different pace. So I know in K through 12, they do a lot of what's called differentiated instruction. So tailoring your instruction to students who might go at a slower pace and those that might go at a faster pace, but that's really hard to do on top of all your other responsibilities. So I think videos really help that. And then lastly, some other chunking research before we do some more practical information.
Is there a question? Sorry.
No question? Okay. And so some of the older ones is when given a list of unrelated items, an adult, this is adult learners, recall between 5 and 9 of those items. So again, just some more research on of ways to break down that information. So lastly, I'm a very practical person. I like practicability. So it's always good to how it translates into the working world. I think this is done a lot more so at the campuses, which I'm very proud of, and from my prior experience and my own teaching. So having real world class case studies, practice problems, and exercises. And the benefits are that students can learn from their peers, they practice the knowledge that they learn right away. And if they get it wrong, you could correct that information before they go down the wrong path. So I know sometimes you actually have to teach students how to unlearn previous information and then how to learn it correctly. And for these items with problem solving, some of the research is that in 2011, they did a study called deliberate practice. So in the science field, this is done a lot with science scientist techniques that they apply in research. And they say, hey, when you're problem solving, you make a plan, you do it, and then you check to see if it's right, and then really act upon it. And so they did this in their regular traditional age class, and they found that the group that did this deliberate practice actually scored twice as high. And one interesting fact as a side benefit is that attendance rose up by 20%. And so one last thing before we kind of model and how you interact is interacting. It's really at the core of the flipped classroom, so like that pun is really saying, hey, take the time to have the in-class be valuable, and especially for shared classes, they might be driving and at the remote, and they might be sitting in front of a television screen, so how to engage them and be involved. And so the research is when you do interact and add that interaction more heavily, it enhances learning, retention, and motivation, sometimes twice as high. And then also with interaction is cooperation. So I'm not going to go into too detailed, but you could either do this, have groups in the same group the whole semester long, or change it up class by class. And it, again, really help with academic achievement, attitudes to the student, to the course, etc. So now we do want to take some time, and it's okay to have the wrong answer. So what are some ways that you interact with your students? It doesn't have to be the class that you're in part of for shared programs. It could be a different one. Maybe you have used clicker questions. Maybe you've had group projects. Maybe you have had just time to have students think and pair and share in those classroom assessment techniques. We'd like to hear from you. So if you're online, please type in the chat. And just to prepare you, I might call on you, Deborah and Hal at New Kensington, because I know that you've done a lot with your blended learning initiative and really doing some great innovative stuff there. So we'll give you a couple seconds, a minute or two to type away, and then we'll recollect from there.
Let's see if we did or not. You charging it?
And if you don't know how, if you're online and you don't know how to get to the chat, at the bottom, there is a little chat window. And if you click on that, you will see the text chat to type away and to see what everyone else is saying.
You see the chat? Okay.
Okay, I think we've had enough time to allow those who wanted to participate to do so. So online, we do have Professor Kumar, who says group assignments and case study discussion. So that's an IST and going through and having those do that. So that's fantastic. So I am going to ask if New Kensington can unmute, and if one of you wants to kind of say what you talked about and what some strategies that you use. Me to show?
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, this is Deborah, and so Hal and I talked about, uh, I teach labs mostly, so that makes it pretty easy because they're obviously working in groups, it's obviously hands-on stuff. Sometimes I use clickers, and I usually use that to show them that they really think they've learned it and they really don't know it very well. So I do that kind of as a review at the beginning of lab, especially for a lab that's continuing similar material. So we use clickers, always anonymous, so that they're not worried about it. And it's amazing how they're surprised that they thought they knew stuff and they don't. So we do that. Sometimes I have them go to the board and write down what they figured out for that lab. Like we were just doing an insect lab the other day and they were identifying the different orders of insects. And so I had them go to the board and write down what they'd figured out. And then after they all sat down, I didn't want to embarrass anybody. I went to the board and erased the ones that were wrong and then said, okay, now anybody can come up and fix those. So yeah, I guess it's almost, I feel cheating because it's lab, so it's really easy to think of things that keep them moving and interacting more than if you were delivering more lecture content. So, and now I'll let Hal share what he was talking about.
Well, I think it's just kind of in the classroom, it's kind of that, I guess, just a think, pair, share thing paradigm where you just throw a problem out and you can group them up. I've done directed labs in computer science classes where we work on a common problem and sort of have various gates, and I'll walk around the room and help students who are having trouble. Probably the only thing I didn't know, I was thinking of something else, was Harvard Law School has this question tool. I think it's called the question tool. And students can log in and post questions there and then vote on the questions they like that they want to hear about, and I've used that to some success to kind of get them. And that way they can kind of each keep posting questions during the class and then take a break and figure out where everybody is and what questions are important at the moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'll look that up and type that in the chat for those, and that way we'll have it online. So thank you for bringing that up, and that's fantastic that you use that. Great. So now we're going to turn things over back to Julie.
Okay, so we're going to just kind of do a little bit of a review. So thinking about how flipping can help your students. And as myself, I love to be able to access videos and lectures online because I feel like, wait a minute, did I get that? So I want to go back, rewind. So it's great so that, if your students are, mastering the content very quickly, they can kind of skip ahead. If someone's not really sure, they can review it kind of at their own pace. So when new content is being learned with the flipped concept, the instructor's actually with the students in the classroom. So it's great to be there to kind of help them, to gauge, are they getting it? Are you going to need to do maybe some additional instruction, or are there other resources that might be helpful for those that are struggling? Oops, oh gosh, sorry, not used to this laptop here. And then also, if you know that you've taught the course before and something's very difficult with students, you can take the time and really spend that classroom time on the things that are really difficult for them. So how do you know if flipping is right for you or your class? I'm sure some of you are kind of thinking about it. So when does it make sense to flip? So if you've done lectures and you know for whatever reason this topic is very difficult and the students seem to get lost, and flipping allows you to kind of, like I said, have extra resources online, include some of the interactivity, maybe provide more opportunity for students, like Deborah said, to do some self-checks, what do they really know, kind of thing. And then if you're teaching something and you've seen, okay, maybe 3 of the students, they get it really quickly. Some of the other ones, they need, more time to work on this. So if you see the different rates of learning, you know that every week 9 of the semester when you cover this content, it just seems like the students are not all at the same place. if you have a lot of questions. So I think that's where putting content online really helps and can kind of help you in terms of your workload as well, is, have that online, and then when you're in class, you can kind of help with things that maybe are more abstract that you couldn't really answer online. So that kind of gives you more time for the in-class component. And also, if you're doing something new, by doing activity in the classroom, you can kind of generate more excitement about the topic. And also giving them that content ahead of time helps them kind of be up to speed by the time we get there. Okay, so as Amy and I said earlier, this is kind of cheesy. This is our propaganda about, why you should flip, or should you flip. If you want to spend more time getting the students focused on higher level thinking, if you want to see them more engaged with the content instead of kind of just sitting there listening to you go through your lessons. If you feel like this is something they really need to know long term, and if it's a skill that they have it, but you want them to be able to build more onto it so that they leave being more advanced, that's something to consider. If you want to teach more creatively and collaboratively. Okay, so before you flip, there's some overall questions you kind of need to think about. You need to think about what is going to be the best use of your class time. What kind of things, again, like I said at the beginning, make sense to do when you're in the same space, everybody's together. What do you want to use for class time? What makes the most sense? Are you willing to give up control of your classroom? And some faculty have struggled with this. Amy has shared some stories with that. So are you willing to do that? And also, what are you going to do with your class time? You need to kind of think through what activities do you want to do in the class? And how much time do you have to committing to actually flipping it? And I see Tammy's with us, and I know Tammy was in the first session of the Blend LT. So if anybody's interested in, how much time and commitment, I think Tammy would be a great person to have that talk with. So technical questions are, we set up videos. So if you're going to do videos to provide some content online, how are you going to do it? Do you know how to do it? Do you need help from someone? Kind of thinking through that. Do you need hardware? Do you have a microphone? Do you have a tablet? Are you going to do maybe some annotation on your iPad that you want to record? And then classroom questions are, more about kind of classroom management. Again, it kind of goes to the control part of things, but thinking about how are you going to monitor the students when they're doing the interactive things? How are you going to know that they're actually doing what they need to be doing? So kind of thinking through all of those logistics. So just some reminders, you don't have to flip everything. Not everything makes sense to flip. So it's not like you have to do everything or nothing. You can, maybe just do one lesson. Just think through one activity that you're like, yeah, this would make a lot of sense. The other reminder is it's more than videos. It's not just, okay, everything I do this lecture, I'm just going to do a video, put it online, and I have a flip class. It's a lot more than that. It's really thinking through what makes sense to have online, what makes sense to do with the students. So I'm going to move on to a discussion. Do you think flipping is right for you in your shared class? Why or why not? Oh, okay. Amy, what did you put in something from in the chat?
I put in the Harvard Life question tool from earlier, what Hal uses in his class.
Okay. Yes, so sure. If you want to use your mic or do chat.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so quick question on the kind of, which can help us taking a decision for flipping or not, or how much flipping. Are there any guidelines on the level of students, for example, 100 level versus 400 level, as well as the size of the class, like 10 students or 34? Are there any nuances to think about those when we think of flipping?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and do this. So really, from my experience, it doesn't matter. So we've flipped, and maybe Deborah has done it for her own Bio 110 course. So introductory level, large lecture. We did Bio 110 lecture and flipped that, and that's going to be an example that I'm going to show you on a little bit more. We've done this approach for Math 21 and Math 22, that intermediate and college algebra. And as well, really the science faculty have done it a lot within shared programs. Rehabilitation health services is another one. I think too, it's kind of content. It depends upon you as the instructor. Even English. So a lot of people think, oh, humanities, they want to have that discussion in class more. But saying, hey, you could actually have even more discussion, having some of the concepts be presented outside of class and maybe starting a discussion online. And then when you come in the class, building upon it and having it be more in-depth discussion, that could be there as well. So it really, it doesn't matter, I think. And then two, another thing I get a lot of questions on is, well, what's the difference between blended or flipped, or like blended / hybrid or flipped? And to me, so blended and hybrid is reducing class time. So if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday course, maybe Fridays would be online. Flipped, you don't have, if you're just doing flipped, you don't have to have that reduction, but oftentimes you do a flipped approach when you do a blended or hybrid course. So I attended a presentation, it was called, is it blended, flipped, or they said blended, F-L-E-N-D-E-D. So it was all these scenarios where we had to determine if they used a blended approach, or a flipped approach, or both together. So it blurs between the lines. So I hope that answers your question, and I'm happy to answer any more.
Thank you, I got it.
Okay, great. So we're going to see if anybody else has any comments or participated in our question. Nobody has. So since you use your microphone, Ashu, if you could maybe answer your question, if you think, is this approach right for you? Do you use some aspects already? Would you be interested in it?
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to just bring back my slide. Okay, so you're asking, do you think flipping is right for you? I think yes, because I'm teaching technology subjects, so it goes both ways sometimes, especially say, for example, and that's where my question came from, but that I asked is that if I'm teaching 110, which is more of an introduction of systems and information, the students may not be really very comfortable reading that because of technology and the kind of subjects that they have not done before. So they might not be getting it just by self-studying and being comfortable in the discussion. But because it is technology subjects, there might be a lot of ways to really involve them in the interaction side of it. Of, say, for example, labs or building something, or writing a program, or doing some Excel and things like that. So yeah. I think it is, and I think it should work very well. The only thing is the investment of time to make sure that whatever you're asking them to do outside the class is easy for them to digest.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so for that example, again, if it's an introductory level course for IST, you're going to have some who maybe had programming classes in high school, and then some who are interested but don't know the first thing. So I think flipping that and having some of the instruction outside really helps and gets them on the same page when they come into the room. So that's why we started for Math 110. Half the class literally said, we want to go faster. Of course, they have the math placement tests, but half the class wanted to go faster. The other half wanted to go slower. So how do you get them on the same page? So having some of that instruction outside and then group work, maybe pairing some students for IST that have that programming knowledge paired with some others who don't and help that team teach aspect is really good. So that's one approach that you could use. And then two, one comment that you had made is time on task. So they actually upped it, Faculty Senate passed it so that for each 3-credit course, it's supposed to be now 9 hours total instead of 7.5. So you don't want to overburden the student since they do have most of them are working outside of college and everything else. So making sure that you're not adding to their burden, that you're really just moving what you would do lecture outside and then homework more to in-class problems. So I think that's it for now. So, well, Deborah or Hal, do you have any comments about flipping if you're interested in it?
I could just mention what we've done, and this isn't a shared class, but this is what we've done with anatomy, Bio 129 at New Kensington. We did this, we started it, I think, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 years ago, but what we did was we divided the lectures up into a whole bunch of short, less than 15-minute video lectures. And then we used the class time. The class time is shortened because it's really a blended class. But we use the class time to go over things that the students are confused about. We also use the class time for their exams. And the students really like it because, like all those things that your presentation said in the beginning, they can watch the videos several times. They can stop and replay if they zone out while they're watching and then they come back to consciousness and realize they just missed something. They can rewind it. They can do it at their own pace. And for the most part, I think it has really improved their scores. And what we're going to do next is we're going to take those videos and add interactivity to them. So we're going to try to add some questions and, knowledge checks along the way, which is going to be exciting. I'm playing with software. In fact, if anybody knows much about interactive video software, I'd love to talk to them. So.
Good. I've dabbled in it. So, and then one question that probably with the mention of videos is, okay, well, how much time does it take to create videos, or even now with accessibility and closed caption? So for me, the one thing is maybe a video exists already that's out there by someone else. So when you think of video, you don't necessarily always have to create it for you. So I'm going to post one, it's a YouTube series called Crash Course, and it's introducing some fun, interactive, basic concepts in several different disciplines in an interesting way that students really like. So we used it in Bio 110 and some anatomy and physiology courses. And then two, if you're interested in video for your shared courses, you could maybe get some additional support. So that's always a good place to dabble in it because we are here to help you for those courses.
Okay, so we kind of talked about this. How do I go about flipping my classroom? And Deborah and Amy provided some really great examples. So we kind of set this up in the Canvas space as well. We like to think about the before, during, and after. So before the face-to-face class time, how are you going to give the students exposure to the content? What are you going to use to get that factual knowledge to them? And so, for example, sometimes people do videos, like we said, so maybe a 5-minute or shorter video, and then have them answer questions about the video. Deborah was kind of talking about that as, different ways to do interactive things with video. Also, we've seen faculty use online quizzes, so that could be in Canvas, or it could be maybe instructor created or publisher provided resources that you can put into Canvas. worksheets, short writing assignments. And a lot of times, as we said, it's, hard to get students to do the pre-class assignments. So, attach points to them, make it something that they have motivation to do because it is part of their grade. But hopefully by doing this and exposing them to the content before they're in the face-to-face classroom, you'll help them to get prepared and come to your, class time ready to go and having questions and ready to learn more about the topic. So when they come to the class, then that's the during time frame. And so these are when you want to do your activities that are, the higher level learning domains, like we said, with the Bloom's levels, and also try to tailor the activities when you're in the face-to-face classroom to what that they've had trouble with or they're struggling with. Make the most use of that time together. And then after, kind of have a continuation of activities and maybe then do your summative assessment. Also, Amy, I just want to mention this, Amy posted the crash course videos in the chat, so there is a link there for you to do that. And then this is more of a detailed before, during, and after, so I won't read through it. You can see this just kind of sums up the 3 parts, so what to be thinking about before, during, and after your time together.
Okay, so as I mentioned before, there's lots of overlapping ideas that you could do in a flipped classroom or a blended classroom. So it'd be interesting for Deborah if she's used this worksheet that I'm going to show in a little bit. So just to kind of define some key terms, a teaching and learning activity, it's one individual activity that supports learning, whether it's reading a textbook, doing homework problems, watching a lecture, maybe you don't have to do video, that it could just be this kind of how-to supplemental guide in addition to the textbook readings, and then discussion, group work, etc. So an instructional strategy is a set of learning activities in a sequenced manner. So when you're doing a flipped course and saying, okay, well, what's this going to look like if I'm going to have more of the learning be outside of class and then more of the homework-based problems inside of class. So one thing that I've found useful, and it's going to be available on Canvas, is this instructional strategy worksheet. So I know it's a little bit blocky, but for each full block that has a full square, that's where you would put what you're doing in class, and then maybe what to correlate outside of class. So you might be saying, okay, well, what does this look like if we have it populated? And what we did was for biology, that each week it's kind of standard, so students know what to expect, with the exception of exams. So between the previous week and coming to class, they have to read the book, they have to have questions on the textbook that count as a pre-class quiz, holding them accountable, and then mini lectures, so narrated PowerPoints that help explain the concepts on top of what's in the book. And for this instructor, they don't say you have to, but it's expected that you know that knowledge. So there's just self-assessment quizzes that don't count for anything, but we track if they use it. And that way, if they get it wrong, they could take it again, maybe watch part of that video again, etc. So then during class, there still is some lecture maybe on the harder concept, but then there's discussion around them, clicker questions to see, do you understand it? Where do you get something wrong to help fix that? And then call and response. So for that, they are paired in groups, and they do a concept that we did during the first session. We don't have too many people, so we can't do it. That we pull out a straw, and that's the location that's going to answer. And then maybe in the groups of 5, say, okay, well, who's going to answer in that group of 5? and they pull it out and it's number 4 of 5. So that's the person that has to answer. So that way it's not threatening because everybody's given time to work in those small groups so they all understand the answer. So that way when they're called upon, they might have struggled before, but their peers help them and they're ready to answer that question. And then more of that group work. And then between, they use that open educational videos, that crash course videos as kind of a, if you struggle, here's a fun way to reinforce that information. And then again, more of the same for the second class of the week. And then at the very end, they have a Canvas quiz of everything that's presented. So it really helps them with that motivation. So is there any questions on what's done in biology? And again, this is just one example. Okay, so you might be saying, okay, that's fine and dandy, but what does this look like? How do you take this information and put it into Canvas? So although it's a little bit long, students really like this. So this is a Canvas module. So for each week, there's one module, and they say, hey, what are you going to learn this week, which is the learning objectives. Then it's the key terms and definitions for that week. And then he says what to do before Wednesday's class. There's a reading check. There's links to additional mini lecture videos. And then Wednesday's class, he puts up the PowerPoint with after the words because he wants them to make sure that they don't have the clicker questions in advance. And then Friday is another reading check for the second part of the module, and then the PowerPoint afterwards, and then by the end of the week. So this works well in many different disciplines. I know that we don't have anybody from engineering here, but engineering students don't like this. They don't like the concept of before class. I know I mentioned it before, how their brain is structured. They say, well, can't the before class just be the homework of the previous one? So it's just interesting feedback. So again, maybe before going down one path or another, maybe some of your IST students won't like that same concept either. For me, for my own IST students, they like it, but each place is different. So it's good to check. And here's just another example. This is for math. So for each week, each class session gets an overview, which is what we modeled in our own shared programs course. And then it has what to do before, during, and after. But that way, if they're on the phone and they just want to go to the lecture guide, we have it in Canvas so they could open up the modules and just click on it, which is really, really nice. And then two, what's for biology, some of the muscle lab videos, so or PowerPoints of how to put clay on top of different bone structures. Having that PowerPoint now in Canvas, you could actually open it up on your phone. So there's students in class having their phone, looking at it and using that to help guide them during class, which is pretty neat. And then here, if you click on the overview, this is what it looks like. And again, we tried to model that for today's session to give you another idea. So again, we want to get your thoughts and opinions. Since we have such a small group, we've been doing kind of just discussions and share out. So we'll give you a couple minutes. And for those of you who are online, if you could type in the text chat that what are some strategies to help you do before classwork? And then we'll go over our own kind of tips and tricks for you. Okay, so I know that Kensington is still talking, which is great. Veronica, you posted some really great things. So if you want to press and talk instead, if you want to press the unmute button in the lower left-hand corner, it'd be great to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Oh, fantastic! Yay! I'm excited for that. So I guess my biggest struggle has been that my classes are maybe 8 to 12, sometimes 16. So the 8 to 12 in the higher level accounting classes, which apparently I love accounting and they don't. I don't understand. So confused. But anyhow, I get all excited about that. Credits and numbers, and they're just like looking at me like I'm weird, but that's okay. And so they just don't come prepared. So because of that, I see that they, like then it really makes a big impact, because if like there's 6 and only 1 or 2 came prepared, they're the only ones talking, and then I've kind of lost the class. So if there's any tips out there for that, I'd be more than happy, because it is for, supposedly they're supposed to come and they're supposed to do this like activity, which I use from McGraw-Hill called Learn Smart. So they're supposed to actually go through the book and get that. And that's so that they're actually reading and understand. That's how I kind of get them to do it. But it's only like 5 points or 10, depending on the class. So that's basically what I struggle with. And so if there's anybody that has fabulous ideas, I'm all ears.
Okay, good. So we are going to go over some, but I'm going to go over what else was in the chat. So one is graded 5-minute quizzes in the beginning of each class, and graded assignments that are due before class. So just because we want to talk and hear from everybody, New Kensington, if you're willing to unmute and hear from you.
I think what we arrived at is that you kind of have to associate some sort of point system to the points to, or give credit for the work that they're doing. You could have them, that seems to be about the only way to make them really take it more seriously. But on the flip side of that, then you're penalizing the good students with busy work. We're the ones that would actually do that, and where they have to be, they can't take a week off per se. It's really hard to balance the giving enough points to the quiz to make it worth, make them take it seriously, but not so much that they have a bad day. It's not going to crush them or set of bad days. And maybe asking them to bring in questions that, submit questions ahead of time. I mean, that question tool can work well in that environment. Generally, I find even if my regular classes, they don't read, they won't watch videos, they don't, if I give them something to do, they'll take, some of them take it seriously, most of them just kind of invest a half-hearted effort, even into discussion forums. So it's really been kind of a struggle in general to get them to do anything, to come to class and be ready to talk to you.
Yeah. And so that's why we had this up, especially, like I know this is for flipped, but for blended courses, when you have that reduction. So let's say students struggle to do the work so as it is, but then you're reducing class time even more so. So then are they really going to do the work or not? So there's different strategies for blended, but we're only going to focus on flipped for today. So I had one instructor who says, you know what, if half the class doesn't do the videos, I'm not going to give them the carrot on the stick, that if they don't come, it's their loss, and I'm just going to teach to the half that does. And if other people are underprepared, they could just leave. I was like, okay, well, you could do that, but again, it might be people who get really, really lost. If you're building that knowledge and going up and up and up, it's in all disciplines. So missing one class, it could really disengage the student and make that really hard. So we do have a lot of different tips and tricks for you to get started. So how do I get class to do the pre-class work? This is by Daniel Pink, who actually was at the TLT Symposium. He was at the keynote a couple years ago, and he did a lot of research on this area. And he said that there's 3 really main areas that help students. So one is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So for the first one, it's giving students direction and guidance, but allowing to do the task on their own, using their own approaches. And so for this, they could read an article and kind of summarize it. One instructor took this to the extreme and said for each chapter, you have to write this detailed outline. I know when I went to school, I sometimes had to do that, but especially some students, that's not their learning preference. Some students are really smart and might know the information, and then they're punishing them, which is what Hal said. So Again, maybe just a brief summary to submit as a good happy medium. And then for mastery, holding students accountable by making their learning visible. So what he says is, whenever you think about giving that pre-class work, is having that question, that little voice in your brain saying, how am I going to have students be held accountable? It could be an outside quiz or something like that, or it could be that what was said online and having a graded quiz during the first 5 minutes of class. Both have pros and cons. For online, even if you have it be timed and randomized, students might heavily rely on the book, so they might not read the chapter, but just look up the quiz answers. But at least, although you don't want to spend class time doing quizzes, if you have a short 5-question quiz, that way they're not relying heavily on books and having that there. So each have their own pros and cons. And then lastly, purpose. So connecting the pre-class work to the end of class one. So Hal did a great suggestion of having questions. So having them submit questions, either maybe in a discussion board or like a little assignment Dropbox where they get maybe, when we've done this and had no points associated with it, students didn't do it. So we said, hey, you got to do 2 questions and submit it. So it could work out really well, but you might run into a problem, which we did, is some of the good students says, I can't come up with a quiz question. I can't come up with the question that I have. So then we said, how about you pose what you find valuable out of it? What was your main takeaway? So giving the choice of putting a question or kind of synthesizing it. And that way, if they do have a question, you can answer it. But if that way, those good students who maybe read and don't have any questions can have a second option for that too. So in preparation, I did a bit of looking, and I've used a lot of these approaches already. It really falls into 3 main categories. So one is setting up expectations, then holding students accountable, and then even if you hold them accountable, you're still going to have those unprepared students who didn't do the work, and how are you going to address them? So hopefully some of you have watched Office Space, the movie. So if you could go ahead and read the syllabus, that would be great. So we know that students sometimes don't look at the syllabus or look at that for that important information. But for flipped classroom, even if you're not doing a reduction, kind of explaining, saying, hey, we're putting the emphasis on you to learn, and that way you're getting a better experience because we're having more interactive class time. And I have part of the wording, and I can make it completely available to you. And then emphasize it during the first week of class. And we know that we do have drop add. Drop add is shorter, but still maybe having that. And then I would say if you're lenient the first 2 weeks and say, hey, now we're going to be more strict. So setting that baby steps along the way. And then for the syllabus, more and more people are doing a syllabus quiz where before, it's easier in Canvas than it was in Angel. But you have, a lot of classes say you have to earn 100% on the syllabus quiz in order to gain access to the rest of the course in Canvas. So that way you could put in questions like, is there extra credit in this class? Yes or no? When are the due dates for various homework? So it might be 1 day a week, like Sunday nights at 11:59 p.m., or it might be 2, so you could do both of those. In addition, you might say, do you accept late assignments with a penalty? Yes or no, or how much? So having those key aspects, and if you want more questions, I'm more than happy to give you various examples. But more and more we are seeing that to help guide them, especially for freshman level courses, having students come from high school and say, making that jump to college. So I have the link. I made a blog post about it, more for hybrid learning. So some example language for flipped is that you learn best when you're actively working rather than passively listening. So because of that, we'll do some of that pre-class work by watching lectures, taking a pre-quiz, and answering questions. And then class time will be used to discuss and work on problems and challenge you even more to real life situations within your discipline. So for holding students accountable, there's lots of different ways. 9 times out of 10, it's usually a pre-class activity, which is a quiz or an assignment where they have to write something or participate in discussion. But like I said earlier, it seems to be pretty similar, is they might cut corners or it might be challenging and not rewarding those good students who know that information. So for in class, like was said too, you could have that brief, quick quiz at the beginning. You could have clicker questions. You could use classroom assessment techniques, which if you look at Schreier, and we could put a link, there's a whole bunch of them. We've been doing the Think, Pair, Share just because of the group here. So one is like the muddiest point. What was a concept that really you struggled with or don't understand? And then 2, pressure. So if you go through that setting up those teams of 3 or 4 students and maybe have a game out of it and say, okay, I have lots of games in my back pocket if you want that. But if students like games, and if you say, hey, your team isn't doing well as this other team just because of that one student who's underprepared, there's that pressure internally that does that. And 4 of the CATs, classroom assessment techniques. So you might have to have a ticket to enter. So if students kind of struggle with doing it the night before, some students do it the day of, you might say, hey, before you come in the door, give us that. And so for a shared program, you would have to make sure that you have the online equivalent, whether it be a Google form, which might be a little bit easier. With moving to Canvas, having that Dropbox does help, which they could do on the phone. And then 2, choosing a side. So for each location, you could say, hey, if something is a controversial topic or if there's not one right answer, you could say, the left side of the room, you go, if you have this point of view. You go to the right side of the room if you have this other point of view. And that way they sit together, they discuss, and then you could have that debate at each location and then bring everybody together. And then lastly, half the problem cheat sheet. So with that, you could say, okay, this person do part 1, then move over to do part 2 if it's paper based, or if you're sharing a computer. I know some students have a laptop at each location. Maybe if you're doing an IST programming example, you could have the front of the room, the computer be shared from a distance to your location and have students take times. In addition, we were talking about it yesterday, that in addition to connecting via Polycom, you connect through Adobe Connect. So there's ways to quickly take this screen and then give it, even though it's your computer and your screen, you could give control to someone else. So this is another perfect example of what you could do for that. Okay, so any questions about those 2 before we go over handling underprepared students, even if you give them points? No? Okay. So I hope that this will answer your question, Veronica. So even if you give them points, you give them motivation to get stuff done, they still might not do it. So one thing which you can't do this semester is maybe have some quotes from previous students about the benefit to doing this approach, or the benefit of how it helped them to get a job, or to certain concepts that they really don't do ahead of time if you see a trend. And then just explain the value from your perspective. And 2, if you see that it's the same students, I know that you're very busy, and have those one-on-one conversations. I know for my students, and I have permission to say this, is 1, they just had to move randomly then. They were just in a bad relationship. Even she was traditional age, she had her own apartment, but then all of a sudden had to move back into her grandmother's house to get out of that relationship, and she just struggled with everything. So we know that our students have these kind of earth-shattering experiences, but having that and saying, hey, it's okay, let's make a plan to get you back on track, versus disengaging them and maybe they might drop your course. So having those one-on-one conversations, I know it's really hard to add to your workload, but I think that could kind of help. And then two, like I said, having that individual conversation, identify and overcome underlying issues. And then it doesn't have to fall on you. If it's maybe study skills, point them towards the learning center and having them go through that. Maybe having them pair up with somebody outside of class and say, hey, it's good for you to mentor, because that way you can put it on your resume that you helped students informally. Or if your campus does have extra tutors in your subject matter, in addition to just study skills, to take advantage of that. And then two, it might be time management, procrastination, external factors. I'm not a fan. I know that many campuses, because of the 2011 core council letters, were charged with getting rid of new student orientation and like first year seminar and those 1 credit experiences. And so I don't know who has it and who doesn't anymore. But one thing that I really like is iStudy modules. So has anybody heard of them before? If you have, raise your hand or type in the chat. Okay, good. So iStudy modules are self-paced tutorials on various topics. There's a self-assessment quiz that they have as part of it, but I actually count it as I made it a real Canvas quiz, and I'm happy to share if you want that. And so I have students, even though they might have taken it before, to have that be done as an assignment during that first week or two of classes, making sure that they know time management skills and they can pace themselves, because I think that's the biggest issue is that priority. So I hope that answers your question. Some additional items, and then I'll ask Veronica if that really did, some additional items is review the guidance, directions, and assignments. So you might think you're explaining something well, but there might be a muddy point that students can't identify or don't want to tell you. So maybe having somebody take a peek at it from an external perspective, and then maybe clearing up some of those directions. And then grading. So although you give points, students, especially if they are working 30 hours a week and are taking 18 credits, they prioritize with what's worth the most points. So is the points that they do for pre-class assignments is it too small or too much? Taking that into consideration as well. So first I'm going to ask Veronica if those are some good ideas. Before we go on, if you want to either type in the text chat if that answered your question, or if there's any other things I could brainstorm. So you could either type in the text chat or unmute Veronica. She is still here. She might got distracted. I know that there's different people coming into her office. Okay, so if she comes back, great. If not, think of a lesson or a week or a module and think about how you would flip it. And again, this is more just high level for now, but what we would challenge you to do afterwards is take that instructional strategy worksheet that we have in Canvas and actually do it. It doesn't have to be the whole class. Again, it could just be 1 week, and take those baby steps. And then maybe next semester, add another 1 or 2. So one instructor who always teaches an overload, always has research, says, I'm never going to have time to do this. So what we did, it took 2 years, but we said, okay, we're going to do this hard concept first. And so we actually took weeks 4 through 8 and did that chunk first. And then to get everybody else up to speed, we then did 8 through 12. And then instead of going to the last chunk, we did 1 through 4 and then finished out the whole course. So you can do it in those chunks too. So we'll give everybody a minute or two to talk about it high level, and then we'll like to hear from you as well. Okay, so do we have a brave soul who wishes to share to the group what they're thinking about? So if you're online, if you want to either type in the text chat, or we could just unmute and we'll hear from you. Or New Kensington, if you want to be the brave soul, you could unmute as well.
Do that, I'll try to do it quick.
Okay, it's on you.
Okay, I'll try to go fast because I know we're almost out of time, but I was just telling how in anatomy again, like several years ago, we do a heart dissection. It's a sheep heart dissection. It's so cool that you're seeing this heart and you have the opportunity to open it up and look at it because it's exactly like a human heart. And I do this little song and dance trying to get them excited about it. Well, for 1 year, it was a disaster. I mean, they cut them in half. They just did everything wrong. They didn't appreciate it. It was just terrible. So what I did was I wrote a handout with good pictures, and I required them to read the handout ahead of time, and they had to take a 20-point quiz ahead of time before that class so that I knew they knew what they were doing. And when they came in then, we had the handout laminated for them so they didn't have to worry about getting their copy all gross while they were dissecting. And it worked. Since we did that, it has improved this dissection enormously. So that was a success story.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Great. Anybody else? Okay, I know that we have about 3 minutes left, so now we're going to go ahead and go over some extra little guiding questions and things to get started.
Okay, so you don't have to do everything at once. We already talked about that. So just start small, pick a lesson, a part of a lesson. Think about what you already have at your campus. As Amy said, we're here to help you with anything that we can. Also, I know at New Ken, Deborah has done the hybrid learning, so she's a great resource as well. And thinking about strategies to help your students if you are doing a shared course, and Amy and I have been working with a faculty member who is at Penn State Hazelton and Wilkes-Barre, and he's doing some really innovative things, so we will be sharing those. But, you know, that's another great resource is faculty within shared programs. So questions to get started, you know, thinking about what do you want to do with class time? What's your objective? What resources do you need to do the activities? How comfortable are you with giving some of that control to your students? We kind of, I think last session when we gave them control over the.
Oh yeah, we gave control over the whiteboard. That was us giving up control, and you could write whatever you wanted on the whiteboard for the last session.
So thinking through things like that, you were on the other end of that experience. How will you assess your results? How will you know if what you're doing is working? Kind of thinking through that before you do it. What do you think is your success? What's your indicator that it's working? And part of the communication piece too is how are you going to share this with your DAA or your program coordinator?
Yeah, so we want to make sure, especially those of you who are a tenure track or even on tenure track for your reviews, it's good to ask for permission than to do something and ask for forgiveness. So some people will appreciate this and give you full support, but we know that there's some areas that might not. So you might want to check with your DAA. And then one interesting fact that we found out this past summer is if you are afraid to integrate an approach because you're afraid that your SRTEs are going to drop, there's a special circumstance that you could say that we're trying something out. So we want to exclude the SRTEs for this semester because of this. You have to do it in advance, but if you're interested, we could point you to the right person at Schreier. And then two, lastly, most of you might be already doing this or have been or have some aspects of it. So think about how can you expand upon it, maybe what pieces are missing, and kind of say, okay, well, what areas, topics do students struggle with? And maybe that's what we could start off with outside and then expand and answer those clarifying questions outside of class or during class time. So that's it for us. Is there any additional comments, questions?
I have a quick question about accessibility in videos. You mentioned the transcription. That's been a hang up for one of the reasons I don't do videos. Is there a service that I can send videos to and have it transcribed? Or do I have to do it myself? Or what's the?
Yeah, so that's been a huge struggle. I know that each campus handles it differently. And two, technically, although you're supposed to do all of them, for me, I think it's really important to at least do the first couple weeks. So if you have a student with accommodations, you have to do it like that. You have to provide that. And it can't just be a transcript. It actually has to be timed like when you watch on
Closed captioning.
a TV screen. So some campuses have said, hey, we're going to hire interns, or if you have the special program of doing the summer, some of the students who come prior to the start of the fall, they've been getting special funds to do some of that. So I know Fayette has done that last approach, and Berks as well. For shared programs, I think that's maybe something that we could do. So one thing that we are going to announce for the second iteration is called TLT Reach. And so if you're interested in kind of redesigning your course, you could apply. And for that, for those people, it's to provide extra resources, and it could be some of that transcription as part of that. It's not something that we could do across the board because that, again, would open up the floodgates. So I know, David, you wanted to chime in.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And I know we had, there were some folks who were using MediaCore at Berks and other locations, and there were some things that were being done with World Campus to maybe get, to integrate some closed captioning services on top of that video delivery service. Since MediaCore went away, there's been kind of a discussion about what's next for video streaming services and video hosting services. So there's now a new committee put together where they're gathering requirements for video storage and streaming And I imagine that there'll be some sort of discussion about accessibility and closed captioning as part of the workflow for that. What's exciting about this, relatively exciting about this, is that I think World Campus and Public Media, as well as a number of different colleges, are looking at finding a common solution. And I think that means we'll have a greater chance of getting some services of closed captioning integrated, or at least a workflow that we can share with people. I don't know if there'll be internal resources available to do this transcription services, but there may be some possibilities for, Penn State negotiated pricing for transcript and closed captioning.
So I know not the ideal answer. And then two, Berks has had students with hearing disabilities. And so they said, like, we can't do this for all these courses. So they said, we need buy-in. We have these students, we're kind of advertising students with hard of hearing disabilities to come here. So we need to make sure that we have money for people who would be interpreters in the classroom and who would do closed captioning for videos, et cetera. And so that's why, although it's great to have your expertise and knowledge and from your perspective, sometimes if you're afraid, maybe having some videos that have been done elsewhere or alleviates that because they already are closed captioned.
Right, I can see doing that. I guess my concern is that I would invest this because I don't know who's in my class. So you don't do this on the fly, you do it ahead of time. And so if I wanted to take advantage of this for, say, this next fall, I don't know who's going to be in there. If I will have somebody, we have the occasional student with hearing disabilities or whatever, something that would require them to have closed caption. And that's not something that, if I invest this effort to make all this thing and the campus isn't going to get behind that, then it's kind of going down the wrong. I can find out ahead of time, but really what it comes down to, it's either we are all in or we're all out. There's really no halfway in between.
And you don't have to do 2-hour videos. You could do 10, 15 minutes. If you have a script, that'll be helpful in terms of making it manageable. And you could do that over a period of time and build more each semester if you have a collection of those resources too. So.
Yeah, and again, like for me, especially what I always say is, even for shared programs, you don't know the students at the other campuses. So to me personally, I would do like the first 4 weeks of all the classes, then just picking one class and doing that. I know that TLT Reach isn't designed in that manner because we focus on redesigning one course. But at least if you apply and go that route, that course would be completely done in closed caption, given the resources to do so. Any other questions? I think that we're like a minute over, 2 minutes over.
Yep.
So thank you so much, everybody. And again, if you have any questions, you're in the Canvas course, you can email Julie and I. And we know that we do have session 4 and 5 coming up. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll stay on the line for extra questions.